I'm going to start this morning welcoming everybody. Thanks for being here. Great time of year. Sad for some. I'm going to go to a funeral this afternoon for Flo Francis. Some of you may know John Francis. Flo is John's mom. Flo and Joe Francis started the Barbers. They introduced franchising to the hair industry. So when people were spending 25 cents for a haircut, Joe introduced the $1 haircut that was pretty fancy, and he got professional athletes, but created an atmosphere that now most, very few independent barbers, they grew that to over 1,000 locations. John Francis' son, he was a young business guy. He was sent to Russia to introduce Cost Cutters, which was one of their brands, to then the Soviet Union. Johnny was actually there as the coup, as the Soviet Union fell apart, and they took him out to the country to be safe rather than coming home. So it's interesting stories. But Flo Francis and her husband Joe, who died 20 some years ago, Scott Plum mentioned that Joe Francis died on April 14th. The family says so he didn't have to pay taxes the next day. Mike Gregory, you can appreciate that.
That is true.
But the Francis family commissioned a book called The American Entrepreneur that told the story. And I mentioned it really here today. I only met Flo once, but the Francis family were true American entrepreneurs and really created an idea and grew it to something pretty spectacular. They sold probably 30 years ago to Regent, so pretty cool story. The other point of personal privilege, some of you may know I've had some health challenges this year. I just feel tremendously blessed, and the EBITDA Partners has been re-energized in 2021. We've added new members. It's just really an amazing group of business advisors, trusted advisors with their clients. So please check out our website. It's not updated with all of our new members, but keep watching EBITDA Partners and follow us in 2022 as we continue to try to do good things and bring good content to all of you. So thanks for being here. Today, we're closing out 2021, a little bit of time left to make that last business call, close that last deal. But I'm really here today to help you make 2022 your best year ever. And I think that requires us, and I'm going to show a little video, and some of you may have seen this, but we're going to.
Do you know what the secret of life is?
No, what?
This.
Your finger?
One thing. Just one thing.
That's great, but what's the one thing?
That's what you've got to figure out.
So I think it's all about your one thing. And when I started business coaching 15 years ago, Vern Harnish from Gazelles talked about having 5 big rocks. And then after a few years, it was, well, you really should have 3 big rocks. And in the last 5 years or so, it's like, no, we all ought to have one thing. You can only think about one thing. And if you get your business aligned on one thing and everybody rowing in the same direction, that's where you get momentum we're going to talk about. And that's where transformation happens. So I'm going to challenge you to figure out what your one thing is. Like Curly, I can't tell you what your one thing is. You have to determine it for yourself. And we're going to help you give some thought to what that looks like. So today, why one thing? We're going to talk about Jim Collins' hedgehog concept, his flywheel, and I just saw a webinar, Jim Collins sharing his flywheel. It's a short monograph to his book, Good to Great, and great stuff. We all ought to have a flywheel. We'll talk about that. The flywheel helps us identify disciplined action. Then I'm going to ask all of you to think about your one thing. What's that one thing, and some ideas. And then if you stay tuned to the end, and we will not take an hour, but if you stay tuned to the end, I have a very special gift for 2022. So I purposely did a Zoom call rather than a webinar. So if anybody has questions as we go along, I do not mind interruptions. I got Josh monitoring chat, so you can throw it in chat, or you just want to raise your hand and unmute. I have no problem being interrupted. So that's today's agenda. Without any remuneration from Jim Collins, today's broadcast is brought to you by Jim Collins and Good to Great. One of the best all-time business books. It's the one that I encourage people to read. I've handed out hundreds of copies of it. If you're not familiar, Jim Collins, absolute data wonk. He has a team of graduate assistants that research, and they study basically every publicly US company to identify good companies, and the standard was long-term performance above the S&P 500, but then which companies move from good to great. And he identified 9, I can't remember if it's 9 or 11 companies that moved, that were historically very good, and something happened to move them to great. And what was the commonality of all that? He determined it wasn't innovation, it wasn't a charismatic leader. He really, one of the things he identified is the hedgehog. Fox is the animal that knows many things. It's cagey, it slinks around, but the hedgehog just focuses on one thing. So he coined it the hedgehog concept. And the hedgehog concept, if you represent it in a Venn diagram, is the intersection of 3 circles. Your core purpose, why does your company exist? Also described as what are you most passionate about? Intersection in what you can be best in the world. So these companies were best in the world at something. And then where does that intersect with your economic engine? And the intersection of that is where the companies that move from good to great focus their attention. Things outside of that, they just didn't do. They hyper-focused on that area. Jim Collins coined the word BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal. It's in that intersection that your BHAG exists. For those of you that have studied some of the 3HAG way methodology, this is profit per X. What's your core strategic profit per X? Is it profit per customer, per ticket at the checkout counter? That's also where your profit per X BHAG rests, right in that intersection. So each of us should do the exercise of what are you passionate about? What's your why? What can you be best at in the world at, and where your economic engine? And that tends to focus you. I often use the example, we spend a lot of time on core customer, and I use Ritz-Carlton. They don't care about the average hotel customer. They really only focus on that top 5%. What do they want? How do we serve them? So that's where their BHAG would lie in that intersection. The other thing that Jim introduced, and we'll talk a lot more about today, is the flywheel. Flywheel is that thing that drives, starts creating momentum. And when Jim talks about his methodology, and he's written a bunch of books, starts with disciplined people, start with who, right people on the right seats in the bus, disciplined facts. Some of you may have heard me talk about the Stockdale paradox. It's confronting the brutal facts and then doing whatever it takes to move through those facts to get where you want to go. And then the hedgehog concept, again, it's about identifying stuff and focusing. That's your disciplined thought. And the flywheel talks about disciplined action. How do we create a culture that technologically disciplines the accelerators that get the flywheel moving? The flywheel, if you use that image or think of that image, it's really hard to turn it over the first time and the second time, and you get it going a little bit faster and faster. And by the time you've turned that flywheel over 1,000 times or 10,000 times, it just has its own momentum. And that's where we're trying to get with your business. And the hedgehog and the flywheel are things that will help you identify that one thing that's going to make your 2022 your best year ever. So as I mentioned, Jim Collins introduced the flywheel. He's done 2 called monographs to Good to Great. One was Good to Great in the social sector, so nonprofits. And this one he expanded and shared more about the flywheel that almost was a footnote in Good to Great, but such a key concept that he wanted to elaborate more and share the flywheel concept. He describes the flywheel as opposed to what he calls the doom loop. So the flywheel, what are those steps forward that are consistent with your hedgehog, that accumulate visible results? People line up, get energized by the results, and the flywheel brings you back to the beginning and starts circling, again, disciplined action. What happens when you approach the doom loop? Something bad happens, you're reactive, you just jump without analysis. Jim Collins talks about shooting bullets rather than cannonballs. So you got a one cannonball, and when it's shot, you don't have any more powder in the keg. So shoot some bullets to get your aim right before you shoot your cannonballs. And in the doom loop, they make reactive decisions. So in his book, How the Mighty Fail, this is after Good to Great. A number of those companies have literally failed. They do not exist. One was Circuit City. And the doom loop there was a board meeting at Circuit City. They're having poor results. This upstart company called Best Buy is nipping at their heels. The board makes a decision that they need to do something drastic. And they're going to do that by letting go their highest compensated employees, because that's going to improve their bottom line. Well, that decision, and it's very well documented in like the board minutes. I'm not sure who suggested it, but the board approved it. Well, the people they let go were their top salespeople, and all of a sudden their sales dropped, 60%, and they were out of business in 6 months. That's the doom loop. And when you're in crisis, you make decisions that are poor, and you go down just as fast as the flywheel can propel you up. So Jim Collins has a meeting many years ago. This little company that was selling books online, Jeff Bezos invited him in to talk. And he had a 2-hour conversation with the leadership team of this upstart Amazon. And he shared with them the flywheel, which I'll talk about in a minute. He never met with them again. He's never consulted with Amazon, but they have developed and used their flywheel to go, to now the premier cloud supporter of technology, but it's all using this. So lower prices on more offerings. They start with books. They wanted to be able to get you a book, any book the next day. By having lower prices on more offering, they increase customer visits that then attract more third-party sellers that say, hey, I want to be in front of those customers, that expand the store and extend distribution, that then allow them to grow revenues against their fixed cost. And that you can see as the flywheel from books to other products to now cloud services. That's been the Amazon flywheel. And we'll talk later about how each of these steps absolutely drives the next step. So it creates that momentum. And also, to avoid the doom loop, you have to make sure that there isn't a chink in the armor, that one of these doesn't get screwed up because the flywheel stops. So not all of us are going to be Amazon, while we might wish we were. I'm not sure if this is why Jim Collins presents this, but this is the example that speaks the most to me, because I've been on a public school board for 24 years. I promised myself that this would be my last election. But a couple of weeks ago, I signed papers and I'm running for election again. I think this is now my 6th time that I've said this will be my last 3-year term. But I'm moved by Ware Elementary School is an elementary school at Fort Riley, Kansas. It's on the military base. The principal was disappointed. They have lots of students that come and go. They're all military kids. They have a limited budget. And this principal was frustrated that their student population, only 35% of their students were reading at grade level proficiency. Not acceptable. So this principal, like, what can I do? She didn't wait for her superintendent to give her permission. She didn't wait for the state or the military to fund her. Brutal facts. This is what I got. I can't afford best teachers, but what I can look for is teachers infused with passion. So that is the cornerstone of her flywheel, is having people, teachers that love kids and are passionate about teaching. Not always the most experienced, not always the best technical teachers. So we're going to build collaborative improvement teams. Professional learning communities is what we talk about in education. So that was critical to her flywheel. I'm going to take people that maybe don't have the experience, but I got to teach them to be good teachers, and we're going to build a collaborative improvement teams to make that happen. We're then going to assess, Jim Collins talks about results. We're going to assess student progress early and often. We're going to show results. That starts driving achievement for each and every child. So, we had 35% grade level reading proficiency. That school 15 years later has over 90% reading proficiency, but it went from 35 to 50 to 60 to 70 to 90, and they've been able to maintain that for over 15 years. So once you start showing student achievement, people notice, enhances your reputation as a great place to teach, and that allows you to replenish the flywheel with passionate teachers. So you get teachers wanting to work there. Last night we had the mother of all school board meetings. We actually started an hour early at 6 o'clock. We have a unwritten but strictly enforced rule that school board meetings have to end the same day they start. So hard stop at 11:59, and we finished right at 11:59 last night. But we got our student report card. This is in Wisconsin. The state does an assessment, and we had a goal that we abandoned, and I'll tell you why, but we had a goal to be one of the top 10 schools in the state. There's 440 school districts. We wanted to be one of the top 10. We're below average in per pupil funding. We're below average in student population, but we had these aspirations. And what, our flywheel is similar, that we need to have teachers, because we can't afford to pay them market rates even. But last night we got our school report card that we went from 85th in the state. We're now 25th in the state. We're the #1 school in the 12 market schools that we compare ourselves for compensation. We're the #1 school in our size. We're #1 school in our percentage of special needs kids, financial assistance kids. So our flywheel is flying, and we have all of the challenges that Ware Elementary had. But that's why you need to get a flywheel and figure out what it is in your business that's going to drive further success. And we'll give some examples. And as you look at the examples Jim Collins shares, which one of these relates closer to your business? Is it being a trusted technical person in your industry, and how do you bring that? Is it a distribution center system? What is it that drives your flywheel? So I like the Ware Elementary because it's not a big company trying to be a small, a company trying to be Amazon. They're just trying to be their niche in the world and be best at what they can be. And I think this one should relate to most everybody, even people that want to be the next Amazon. Intel we're familiar with, and Jim uses this example of how your flywheel can morph as the chips that Intel sold became obsolete. They moved their flywheel to different technology, but the same flywheel still applies. So designing new chips that customers crave. They were trying to double storage capacity every couple of years. That is one of their drivers. They want to charge a high price before the competition catches up. That drives down, then they start driving down their unit costs as they get more volume. They take the time to harvest profits, even as profits may be falling, but the key to their flywheel is reinvesting those profits to the next level of design that morphed out of the original chips that they started with into other technology, but a different flywheel that isn't about lowest cost, attracting customers. It's actually about having technology that allows you to charge the highest cost. So a different flywheel. So as you're listening to these, think about what your flywheel ought to look like. And then Gyro is a product. So their first product was bicycle helmets. Now they have shoes and all kinds of things. They invent great products. That's the top of their flywheel. They get elite athletes to use them. So this young cyclist in the Tour de France, he's behind. He's doing the time trial on the day before the last day of the Tour de France, and he rides to victory in a way that he wins the Tour de France by 9 seconds. He happens to be wearing a gyro helmet, and that shines them in the world spotlight, inspires guys like me, weekend warriors, to buy their stuff at high prices. That then attracts mainstream customers, builds more brand powers, and they again use their high prices to develop other products. And Gyro now has a wide range of high-end bicycle-related products, but they always start by getting some famous cyclist to use it, and then the rest of us say, I want to be like Mike, and I'll buy that product. And that's their flywheel, and it's been pretty successful for them. So again, that, and I'm going to go back one screen. Whoops, wrong way. The top of your flywheel, I think, is your one thing. You have to nail that thing that is the top that drives your success. Is it great products? Is it new designs? Is it passionate people? Is it lower prices? There's other things it could be, but those are the things to think about. And why the flywheel is important is that top of the flywheel, then what drives the circle around. So Jim shares a methodology, pretty simple methodology to come up with your flywheel. You start with documenting significant repeatable successes. Where has your organization shined? It just clicked. You can't necessarily explain why that customer is so loyal to you, but that's what you got to figure out. You start documenting that. You start with success. Then you flip it around, and you're not doing this alone. You're doing it with your leadership team, your advisors. Then you say, where have we failed? Where we just didn't deliver, or we really strive for something, we didn't quite get there. Where were the disappointments? And then you start comparing those to look for commonalities. And then what I do is, rather than doing the flywheel as a group, I send everybody on the leadership team, create what you think the flywheel is. Sketch out the flywheel, and then you come back and you work together, you argue about steps, and you try to come collaboratively. But what often happens, the president, the CEO, the owner of the business, they'll say something, and not one person in the room is willing to disagree with them. So their comment stifles the ingenuity of your team. So let everybody sketch out the flywheel for themselves. Jim Collins suggests if there's more than 6 cogs, it isn't working. You got to really hyper focus, and then test and score it. How do you do? How do you do? Is it driving itself around the horn? So that's tip, and I can share all of these slides if people want them. The question to ask is, if each item on your flywheel if it does not drive, propel, actual propulsion to the next step, you ain't quite got it right yet. So that's what, if you look at these flywheels that I shared, all of them drive the next spot on the flywheel, because the whole intention is to create momentum. It's all about momentum. Special offer, all of you, if you want to mock out your flywheel, email it to me, whatever explanation you think you need. It could be self-explanatory, but if you think it needs explanation, email it to me. I'll give it the once over, share my comments, give you a call, send you an email. But I think it's helpful to sharpen our flywheels as you share it with others. And then somebody can ask a question like, well, what do you mean by that? Maybe that's not right. That's how, and I love looking at these. So any of you email it to me. I'll have my email at the end, and I'll take a look at it and I'll share comments, and happy to do it. So what's the purpose of all this? Back to your one thing, that special thing that Curly says you have to decide for yourself. And I've listed some things it might be. I think the hedgehog concept helps you sharpen and figure out at least a space where that one thing might be. The flywheel is another way to drive you to focusing on that one thing. I've had lots of people that really sharpen their core customer. I've had people that they took all of their products, put them on the table, and they 20% represented 80% of their profit, and they threw away 80%. So they've hyper focused on the things that were most profitable. My very first coaching engagement a dozen years ago, company struggling, 3 years flat. They were trying a dozen different things to grow. And our one thing was selling more to current customers. And they went from 8 million to 10 million to 13 million to 16 million in 3 years. So they doubled their revenue in 3 years, added 1 FTE, 2 half-time people. There was more sales in their current customers that they were leaving on the table. One of my clients, and I don't coach them, but they're a law client, Swedish outfit bought their company. They were 25 million, growing, but kind of plateaued. They wanted to get to 50 million and beyond. This year they'll do 75 million. And I asked the hired gun president, how are you going to get there? He says, well, I just went to a board meeting last week in Sweden, and I told my board that I was going to double the business of the company by going from 150 customers to 7 customers. He said 7 customers represent billions of dollars of injection molding. There's more work than we can handle with 7 customers, and we're spending too much time on the $100,000, $50,000 customers. That's a distraction from what our one thing should be. And I talked to him a month ago. They're actually down to 30 customers, but the 30 are all related to 7. So they're subsidiaries of the 7. So, and they've gone from 25 million to 75 million by actually cutting customers. So I think it's something everybody should analyze. If you remember Cheers, one of my buddies wrote a book, The Cheers Method of Marketing. And when Norm came in the bar, he was greeted, hi Norm, and his beer was sitting on the table just as he wanted it. But what else? Where else did Norm buy beers? We never saw him take a 6-pack home. So that's how you get more sales to current customers. I talked about shedding non-core customers. So sometimes we're out of that intersection in your hedgehog. It's hard to give away customers, but when you look at the value of your time and how you can maximize it, that might be your one thing. One of my clients is focusing on custom orders to having inventory so you can take it when you go in the shop. You don't have to special order it, wait 6 weeks, particularly this time of supply chain issues. They have it in stock. Everything you see in the store, you can take home with you. And so that's another shift, a one thing that they're working on. As I was working with one of my clients now, they came up with their key differentiator amongst their competitors is being hyper responsive. And so they're focusing on making sure that becomes part of their flywheel. And how do you do that? And so that's their one thing. Technology that amazes, that is often a one thing. Product throughput, client that just can't seem to get it out the door. We have sales, we just can't get it out the door. That may be your one thing. Is it a long-term forever thing? Probably not. Actually, current sales or more sales to current customer, we peaked at 16 million. So when we were at 13 million, we started looking for the next one thing that was going to keep them moving beyond 16 million. So these are ideas of what your one thing might be. And we're going to finish this next slide and kind of open it up and see questions and also ideas of what your one thing. Systems in general, it might be your system to onboard. It might be your system to pick and pack to get stuff out the door. It might be a CRM to track leads. It might be a monitoring of your KPIs. I can't help but plug my own monograph on cash, monitoring cash, how your 1 + 1 + 1 can equal 19, another system that could be your one thing. And sometimes it's a system of systems. That's what really the 3-HAG process is. It's an execution system. It's a technology system. It's a human resources system. It's a culture system. That's might be your one thing. And then right now with the pandemic, the great disengagement of employees, maybe your one thing is dealing with people. Maybe it's a cultural thing. I've had a number of clients that have focused on culture and over time moved from being half-baked in terms of their client employee engagement to like world-class, over the top. I want to work there because this is such a wonderful place to live. So that may be your one thing. So I'd like to kind of open it up and invite anybody to unmute themselves. I think in terms of identifying your one thing, write it down. What's your first instinct? Test it against your hedgehog and your flywheel. Does that one thing add momentum to your progress? Again, welcome you to email it to me. I'll share my comments, but we have some time. Anybody want to share what they think their one thing, or why what reaction to what they're thinking about their one thing? Anybody want to be bold and just share? So just unmute yourself and give me an idea.
I'll take a shot at it, Jeff.
All right, Pete, thanks.
The one that keeps coming back to my mind is to sell 2 systems a month. Is that the concept?
So that's your focus, is going to be selling 2 systems. That's your one thing. Then whatever you have to do to make that work, that's your one thing. You need to make sure that's your one thing. Now you might create one thing that helps drive that. Is it a technological innovation? Is it a pricing structure? Is it a marketing scheme? What is it, your one thing that's going to make that happen? So selling 2 machines is kind of the scorecard.
Yeah.
But what's the one thing that will help assure that happens? Because selling 2 machines in January doesn't drive 2 machines getting sold in February.
Right. Okay.
That's where your flywheel, you got to step back and determine what is it that's going to drive a sale in January and then in February and then the month after that. So thanks for being vulnerable.
You're welcome.
Other ideas, comments? I'll start calling on people if you don't speak up. Mike, you're one of the few that has your video. So in your consulting business, the speaking stuff that you're doing, thought leader stuff, what do you think your one thing is?
Overcoming conflict with collaboration. That's what I do. I make firms more productive. I make them more profitable. I help them address issues. Could be with the board, could be with their own employees, could be with customers. How do you overcome conflicts with collaboration? That's what I do.
So that's your thing you do best in the world. That may be why that may be your why. You could put that on the top of the IDS tower, and how are you going to get people to come in? What's the one thing that's going to drive that flywheel so you can do more and more of that?
Well, in my case, I've now been in business over 10 years. So I've got 10,600 who I send out my newsletter to. I get about 25% open and about 20% clicks, which is a little bit better than average.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm well known for this. So I'm involved with issues that I'm involved with negotiations. I'm involved with mediation, and my name is now well known. So my brand of Michael Gregory Consulting LLC is now working for me. And I make a point of reaching out to 3 people a day. It's a lesson that I have for myself. And my momentum just keeps right on going. And so for me, I'm just thinking that's my driver, overcoming conflict with collaboration. I'm a mediator with the Supreme Court here in Minnesota, so I get some of the drives from that. I'm on the Minnesota State Bar Association Alternative Dispute Resolution Section Board. I chair an ethics and oversight board for business valuers in an organization called NACVA. So because I'm a writer, so I get my name out there in different venues, and because I do what I do and I'm very successful with what I do, and boards of directors have told me, Mike, you're not a problem solver, you're a solution provider. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, you came in to work on this given problem with us, but you asked so many questions. We looked at it much more broadly than we had previously, which allowed us to look at things differently and better. So as I'm thinking, I like your reaction to that, Jeff.
Yeah, so part of your flywheel seems to be creating raving fans by doing what you do best, that then creates the reputation that attracts more people with problems. Hey, and I've described myself often as I take pride in being able to find that one point in the universe that everybody can agree on. And I mean, you're like best in the world at that. And so I think that's part of your flywheel is, how do I make damn sure I have satisfied customers? Well, it's doing what I do best, solving problems, bringing solutions, and that drives more attention that gets you more and more. So I think you're focusing on the hedgehog concept. The flywheel would help you figure out what it is that drives each of those things. So a speaking engagement, a book, a newsletter,
yep.
That's the thing that drives people coming to you looking for solutions. Mm-hmm. And the advocates, if you will, that are engaging you to help bring resolution to a problem. Those things that you're doing are attracting them, that drives your flywheel.
Yeah, my primary customers are attorneys and business valuers, because I have a background in business valuation. Mm-hmm. So my reputation amongst them, again, 12 books, you just commented, I give over 50 presentations a year. I've got my newsletter broken up into market segments. Different newsletters go out to different market segments with different things they want to have. And one of the things I had to learn was not having in a newsletter what I wanted to tell them. It was learning what do they click on. I have a group of SEO specialists in India, 6 people who look at my stuff. And they come back and they go, Mike, here's where you're getting your clicks. And so I've looked at the clicks that I get, I need to have more articles or links, not so much articles, but links to different things that these are the things they like to see, they like to have. And that just drives more. It just keeps driving more.
But if we looked at the Ware Elementary, building that reputation, in their case, they're trying to bring more teachers. You're trying to bring more problems, but it's building that reputation through SEO, all of the things you're doing and sharpening that absolutely drives, and you're hyper-focused with your team on what drives it to the next thing, which is people signing up and hiring you to help them.
Yeah, if they have a conflict with, if they have a conflict with the IRS relative to a valuation issue, estate and gift, transfer pricing, whatever it might be, I know how to coach my clients to resolve this quicker, saves them time, saves them money, and they have closure. Or I'm involved with small businesses or businesses that are in a divorce. You have an in-spouse and out-spouse. They both have hired experts. They're both prepared to spend $100,000 to $200,000, $300,000 to get through this. And we can resolve this for 20 grand with mediation and the parties making their own decisions. But they have to be able to work, they have to be able to know how mediation really works with a qualified mediator that understands how to address these with their parties. Anyway, I actually, my wife tells people I no longer work for a living, I just have fun, and I tell people she's right.
Awesome.
Okay, on to somebody else.
Anybody else want time? Otherwise, we'll move on. So you've lasted long enough that I want to share with you a special gift for 2022. Guaranteed to be the best gift you receive this year going into the next year. And it is stop doing something. We all add things and every day, and we start New Year's resolutions to add more things. Create a stop list. We're going to stop doing that. We aren't going to sell that product. We're going to fire that customer. That's one of my buddies, his wife retired, and I said, well, what's Wendy going to do in retirement? And he says, anything she damn well pleases. And I pondered a little bit and I said, you know, I think my definition of retirement is not doing anything I don't want to do. To which my wife said, you must be retired now because you don't do a damn thing you don't want to do. But I think I really do live my life that way. I have so many things that used to draw energy from me. I don't do them anymore. I delegate them. I've decided I don't have to do that anymore. So I would challenge each of you to create a stop doing something, and that may be your one thing that propels 2022 to being your best year ever. Before we close, and I'm going to ask everybody to share their one thing with me. Very, very pleased. I'm affiliated with Shannon Susko as one of my coaching organizations that I'm doing. Shannon is the one that she's written 3 books, The Metronome Effect, The 3-Hag Way, and most recently, The Metronomics. And she has really become a world-class thought leader, primarily for the entrepreneurs driving growth. And she wants to help people build systems that bring confidence and predictability to your growth. So the 3-Hag Way is setting I mentioned BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goal. Shannon coined the phrase 3-Hag, 3-year highly achievable goal. Through her system, we help companies identify that target just over the horizon that becomes very highly achievable because we've put it together with a system. It isn't a wild ass guess. It's not a spitball. It's not a single box in a one-page plan. Anyway, Shannon, Glenn Dahl and I are bringing Shannon to town April 28th. It'll be an all-day boot camp, more details to follow, but I encourage you to save a date. I'm not sure this is our pricing, but what Shannon does when she does this for her own account, she charges $1,500 for a CEO, but if you bring your whole leadership team, $500. So kind of counterintuitive, but she really wants to bring teams. So we're going to have a pricing model that encourages team. It'll be way lower than $1,500, I guarantee you, but we want to, it really is a boot camp for team, because what's going to happen is you're going to get jazzed about the 3HAG system, and then you're going to have to go back and explain it to your team. So bring your team, they'll be invested. You'll get a lot of good work. So April 28th, save a date. It'll be an all-day affair. Questions, comments? And then I think the last slide is just, if any of you, again, want to email me your flywheel, your one thing, whatever, feel free to send it to me. And next slide has my email address, but please do that. I love seeing stuff. I'm happy to give it the once over and share my comments and observations. So any questions? Unmute yourself, raise your hand. Josh is following chat. Hi, Jim. I just saw your video shoot on.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had a breakfast meeting, ran me late, so good to see you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Hey, Jeff,
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah, please.
I run a small nonprofit, all volunteer army. Do you have any thoughts on how that you might go about applying this in that kind of an environment without kind of at a 10,000-foot level?
Yeah. No. So I have a friend in Canada that has focused his entire professional practice applying the technology that we all learn in our coaching culture community, and he only works with nonprofits. And so all of the stuff, and Jim Collins wrote a monograph in applying good to great principles to the social sector, the nonprofit community. So actually in my Breakthrough Impact group, we just had a nonprofit join. It's a funny history or odd history. 30 years ago, class action against the Minneapolis HRA for discrimination settled with some money that was going to fund a nonprofit to help assure access, information access to people looking for subsidized housing. And I was a young lawyer who volunteered to do the legal work. And 30 years later, they're still in business and they're joining Breakthrough Impact Group, launching a couple of business enterprises. That'll be the first time they've actually charged for their nonprofit services from the communities that they serve. So all of the stuff, Flywheel, Ware Elementary, not a for-profit. It's a public elementary school. All of this stuff applies. And I have a workshop that I've done when the hedgehog concept that kind of takes it step by step to help you identify what you're passionate about, what you do best in the world, and where your economic engine is. And with this housing organization, I did that 20 years ago, and we found that our economic engine didn't intersect with our passion and what we did best. We were just selling our services to the state to make money, but it didn't create a hedgehog. So we actually morphed that enterprise to have that intersection, but absolutely applies to nonprofits. Its profit isn't necessarily your driver, but it's social impact. What's the capital that you're gaining by the social impact that you bring, and you get people fired up and driving to that. So what's the one thing that your nonprofit needs to do to have more and more impact? You know, and my school board, unbeknownst to us, we really followed the Ware Elementary, having passionate teachers, and we are the place to work. You know, we get people that have opportunities to go other districts for more money within 10 miles of our schools, and they choose to be with us because it's a great place to work that drives, and they're seeing results. In our report card last night, I mean, literally brought tears to my eyes. We've been working so long and we've been inching there, but the flywheel seems to be moving and we catapulted up, you know, to sort of top of the list. So absolutely applies to nonprofits.
Thanks.
Yeah, all of us are involved in nonprofit boards or whatever. This stuff works there. Challenge them, because nonprofits are notorious for trying to do too much. And if they hyper focus, they'll have more impact in a narrower space. But it's hard because the needs are so wide. But it's, if you come to realize you can have more impact if you hyper focus on one thing, on a narrow area where you're passionate and you can be best at, that's where the nonprofit. So all of us serve on nonprofit boards, advise nonprofit. And so it's a lesson. And Jim Collins' stuff absolutely applies to nonprofits. Good. Any other questions? Again, if each of you would humor me and in the chat, just put a one phrase, close, comment, anything that you got from this. Terrible, awesome, thank you, whatever it is. Just take a moment and put it in the chat. We're, I'm going to open my chat so I can see it. And do that. It's good to see everybody. New Year's resolution. Thanks for being laser focused. Reflections, reinforcement, thought-provoking ideas. I don't know which one that was, but I'm glad to provided that for you today. Thanks everybody for being here. It's a busy time of year. I appreciate you taking the time. We've recorded this so you can come back. If you want a copy of the slide deck, simply send an email, and here's my email address. We'll use my MinBig email address, jredmond@minbig, and we'll make sure you can get, this is actually, the slide deck is actually emailable. It's not so big that you can't email it. And everybody have an amazing Christmas. Not everybody celebrates Christmas, but everybody can celebrate a great new year and spend this time enjoying your family. And I wish you all very safe travels, and we're going to have the absolute best year ever in 2022. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.